These are Unit 4 notes, Taxonomy. Take a minute and set up your page. And what we'll be doing today is B8B. So B8B says that you're going to categorize organisms using a hierarchical classification system. So categorize, put them into groups. Categorize organisms using a hierarchical, it's a big mouthful of a word, classification system. Okay, hierarchical means it's just one order is higher than the other. Kind of like when you talk about schools, when you talk about grades, you have first grade, second grade, third grade, and the material gets more and more and more and more intense as you go, so it's a hierarchy. So we're using a hierarchical classification system based on similarities and differences. How are they alike? How are they not alike? That are shared among organisms. Using taxonomy. So basically, you're going to categorize organisms using a hierarchical classification system based on similarities and differences shared among organisms. So basically, we're going to use the taxonomy. So we know what the definition of it is from yesterday. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this system and try and figure out what's going on here. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to pick a pretty color. Let's pick this one. And what we do is we start with the biggest, and we're going to go from largest to smallest. So domain, and I'm going to make an arrow. So domain, kingdom, phylum, let's see, class, order, family, genus, and species. So I'm going to make my arrow, and I'm going to make it go down here, and my arrow is going to be big at the top upper left hand corner. It's going to get smaller as it comes down here. So take a minute and make your arrow. So what that means is domains are the biggest. There are 3 major domains. Every single stinking organism on the planet can fit into one of those 3. You can take the domains and split them up into kingdoms, and there are 6 kingdoms. And all of the organisms then can be split off according to what they're like. So what we're doing is we're going largest to smallest. So the largest numbers of different types of organisms down to where you get down to the species level, and there's only one kind of organism at the species level. As you go down here, down this arrow, follow the arrow down, they're more closely related. As you go up the other way, that would mean they're less closely related. And then as you go down this way too, there's more similarity. More similarities means that they are more alike. Okay? So when we talk about these things, what we're really going to focus on are the domain, the kingdom, and really when we talk about names, the genus and species. Those are the ones that are most common that people know. Typically what I'd like you guys to do is I'd like you to come up with some type of mnemonic. So a mnemonic means that you come up with a little rhyme, or using the first letters you come up with a sentence or something. You can, let me see, I'm trying to think of some things that you've used in the past as a mnemonic. Like you might have come up with a little mnemonic to memorize all the planets. What is the one in the math? My dear Aunt Sally please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, I think is what it is. That's a mnemonic. That's an example of that. So you're going to want to come up with a mnemonic with the first letters of these so you can remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. As you go down this arrow, there are fewer number of species. That's a really big deal. Fewer number of species as you go down that list. Okay? So, in order to do all this stuff, what we do is we use something called a dichotomous key to figure all this stuff out. So how do we categorize organisms? How do you pick up an insect or a frog or some kind of mammal or even a leaf from a tree, and how do you go about figuring out, well, what is this organism? What is the genus and species? What's the scientific name of this thing? And what you do is you use this thing called a dichotomous key. A lot of these words that we're getting into now are words that you're only going to hear about or read about in a biology class. So they're not something that you find elsewhere, so you really have to stick it into your memory and you have to work it to keep it into your brain here. So we have something called a dichotomous key, and we'll use some of these throughout here. This is a series of usually 2 questions. I'm going to put 2. And I'm going to put a question mark in parentheses because it can change a little bit. Series of 2 questions. They're usually yes, no, or this or that. Series of 2 questions used to identify an unknown organism. So when I was in college, one of the things I had to do as an undergraduate student is I had to count scales on the head of a little water snake. So a man was working on his PhD, his doctorate, and he had these probably about 10 containers of little bitty water snakes. And so they were just babies, but they were all dead, and so I had to go through here and count the scales on the head, because one of the questions on the dichotomous key was to tell the difference between one species and a different species. They had different numbers of scales. One had 13 scales on the head and the other had 12 scales on the head. So they were different species. They couldn't mate and have offspring. So that might be part of a dichotomous key that you would use. So dichotomous keys, it's a series of 2 questions, and you go through and say, okay, is it this or is it this? If it's this one, go to question number 3. If it's the other one, go to question number 5. You know, something along those lines here. So when we do this, we want to show the relationships between these. So it's not just about identifying what an organism is, it's also showing how they're related in this classification system. So we use a dichotomous key to identify, so here it is, to identify an unknown organism, and then we use a phylogenetic tree to show how they're related. See, there's another ugly word. Phylogenetic tree. And we use this to show relationships. So it's not just what's the name of the organism, it's also, well, how is that one related to the others that are here? So how closely are humans related to chimpanzees? Well, how closely are they related to gorillas? You know, we're all primates there. We're in that order primate here. But how closely are we related as we go down? Well, if we look at this, we're in the same domain. We're in domain Eukarya. We're in kingdom Animalia, phylum Vertebrata, class Mammalia. We're both mammals. Order Primates. And then we start kind of veering off right in here, but we talk about how closely we are related. We can look at the DNA to look at close relationships, or we can look at the phylogenetic trees. So a phylogenetic tree really shows the evolutionary relationship. How about their past, how closely related were their past ancestors? So it shows the evolutionary relationships between different species or organisms. Okay? And there's a very specific type of phylogenetic tree that is not only showing that relationship, but it also shows it's kind of organized by time. It's almost a timeline too. So how far back were they this closely related, and so on. And this is called a cladogram. So you will see both of these in the stuff that we're going to be working on. So a cladogram is a type of phylogenetic tree that also incorporates when. Incorporates, includes. So how far back did that evolutionary branch arise? So it incorporates when the evolutionary branch arose. And sometimes the terms right now don't mean a lot to you, but we'll be working on these with the pages that we're working on, in class and online. When I give you a video to watch, you need to make sure you watch it, because you're not just going to understand this stuff just by listening to one little set of notes here. So it incorporates when the evolutionary branch arose. Okay, and the length of the branch. So these are called phylogenetic trees. That should tell you right there they're going to be something that kind of branches off. It might be something that looks like this. You know, and that's where they kind of start talking about a tree of some kind, branches, things like that. So it might be something along those lines. So the length of the branch and placement is equivalent to when that group evolved. So the length and placement of the branch is equivalent to when the group evolved. How about, let's say it this way, it shows when the group evolves. How about that? So when we look at this, if I have two branches that are really close together, these two are more closely related than, say, this one and this one. That makes sense, doesn't it? So when we look at this and we look at these branches, how close they are when they pop up, they're saying that. That's a cladogram. A cladogram, they're careful about how far the branches are apart, the distances between them, because they're trying to put in a time frame in there. Many phylogenetic trees don't do that. So it doesn't really matter how big the branches are or how far they are apart. So you might have some alternate names. They might call them phylograms. They might call them dendrograms. If you see those, you should be able to look at it and tell what this is. You don't have to know if it's a different name or another, but you should be able to look at it. I will make another video where we're going over some of these phylogenetic trees, the cladograms. I'll make a video that's not notes. It's just going to go over some of your papers, so look for that one, okay? So we have categorized organisms using a hierarchical classification system based on similarities and differences shared among the organisms. So there's also going to be a couple of labs that you're going to have to do, so you guys need to be prepared to get your materials for that.